August 11th, 1942, 0:21:07 hours. The forgotten island of Kavoa in the southern Solomons did not wake to artillery or aircraft engines, but to a sound the Imperial Army had never written into its manuals: the deep, mechanical thunder of a pump-action shotgun cycling in the dark. When the first men of the U.S. 3rd Raider Battalion stepped out of the surf at Black Coral Beach, they carried rifles, submachine guns, and something far more unsettling to anyone waiting inland. Sergeant Eli Warren felt the weight of the Winchester pressed against his chest as he moved forward through wet sand and tangled roots, every sense screaming that the jungle was alive and watching. The Japanese garrison near the Taro River had prepared for a different kind of war. Their officers, led by Major Kenji Morimoto, believed in distance, discipline, and steel. Rifle volleys at range, bayonet charges at the moment of decision, cold blades finishing the fight. They believed close combat would be silent, personal, and brief. They were catastrophically wrong. When the first contact came in the mangroves, it lasted less than 10 seconds and rewrote every assumption Morimoto's men had trained under. Warren pulled the trigger and never released it. The shotgun roared again and again as his arm worked the fore-end in a blur, each blast vomiting a swarm of lead into shadows that had been men a heartbeat earlier. Buckshot shredded bamboo cover, ripped through palm trunks, erased silhouettes mid-motion. Japanese riflemen fired once, maybe twice, before the darkness exploded around them. In the time it took a bolt-action rifle to chamber a second round, the Winchester had already spoken 6 times. 54 pellets tore through a space no human body could survive. Panic spread faster than orders. Shouted commands dissolved into screams. What the defenders heard was not just gunfire, it was impossibility. The weapon felt wrong, unfair, mechanical in a way their doctrine could not answer. This was not marksmanship or honor or steel meeting steel. This was mathematics turned violent. The shotgun did not aim at a man. It erased an area. Unknown to Morimoto, this moment had already been argued over once, years earlier, in distant offices and diplomatic cables. A similar sound in the mud of Europe had frightened another army badly enough to call it illegal. But on Kavoa Island, legality meant nothing. Only effect mattered. And as the surviving defenders fell back toward their inner positions, one truth settled into the humid air. The jungle favored whoever could kill fastest in the dark. That realization would force the Imperial Army to adapt, to harden, to change its night tactics across the Pacific. But not tonight. Tonight belonged to a weapon designed decades earlier, refined for war, and about to shape every engagement that followed, because what began on that beach would echo into trenches, caves, and midnight assaults still to come. Long before the first shot was fired on Kavoa, the Imperial Army believed the night already belonged to them. Their manuals spoke with confidence bordering on certainty. Darkness was not chaos, it was an ally. Surprise was not luck, it was doctrine. Captain Hiroshi Takeda had memorized the words as a cadet. Kishu, the silent night strike that shattered enemy nerves, and Kyoshu, the overwhelming night assault that broke positions by will alone. In China, it had worked. In Malaya, it had worked. At fortresses that were supposed to be untouchable, it had worked spectacularly. Singapore had fallen not because the Japanese had more guns, but because they moved when others slept, closed the distance, and killed face to face. Takeda believed this truth with the calm certainty of a man who had never seen it fail. The Americans, he had been taught, were dangerous at range and clumsy up close, dependent on machines and daylight. Once the distance collapsed, once steel met flesh, spirit would decide everything. That belief followed Takeda to the narrow spit of sand at the mouth of the Ilu River on the night of August 23, 1942, when his battalion advanced in perfect silence, boots wrapped, rifles slung, bayonets fixed. The attack was textbook, darkness, surprise, close combat, and then the jungle answered back. The 1st Marine Line did not break or panic. Instead, The night erupted with a rolling concussion that sounded nothing like rifles or machine guns. It was deeper, heavier, angrier. Corporal Daniel Hayes stood knee-deep in water, heart hammering, as shapes emerged from the darkness exactly where Doctrine said they would. He did not aim carefully. He did not need to. The shotgun bucked in his hands as he held the trigger down and drove the fore-end back and forth like a piston. Each blast tore open a cone of death in front of him, leaves, branches, and bodies collapsing together. Japanese soldiers charged forward, expecting a single shot, a pause, the familiar rhythm of bolt-action fire. Instead, they ran into continuous impact, men dropping mid-stride, ranks folding inward as if crushed by an invisible wall. At 20 yards, the buckshot punched through bamboo, web gear, bone. At 30, it still spread wide enough that no mistake in aim mattered. The darkness that was supposed to protect them betrayed them instead, because the shotgun did not care where a man stood inside its pattern. Panic began where confidence had lived. Orders vanished, courage became irrelevant. Some reached bayonet range and found Marines who were still firing. Others died without ever seeing what killed them. By dawn, the sandbar was littered with bodies. The river choked with the aftermath of an attack that should have worked and absolutely did not. Takeda was found among the fallen, his sword still sheathed, Doctrine intact and useless. Marine reports would later speak clinically of increased close-range firepower and successful defense, but the men remembered something else entirely. They remembered how the night lost its advantage. They remembered that silence no longer meant safety. Word spread fast through the jungle and faster through Japanese ranks across the Pacific. The Americans had brought a weapon that thrived exactly where Japanese doctrine lived. Night no longer negated firepower. Close combat no longer belonged to spirit alone. And as both sides adjusted, one truth became unavoidable. The next encounters would be even deadlier, because now the enemy knew what waited for them in the dark, and fear would change how the war was fought. By late 1942, the Marines no longer waited to see the enemy. They listened for him. The jungle spoke in snaps, whispers, wet footsteps, and the men learned to answer those sounds instantly. Training shifted from marksmanship to instinct. Fire low, fire fast, fire where the earth itself might betray a crawling body. When buckshot skipped off coral or hard-packed ground, it did not lose its purpose. It multiplied it, fragments screaming upward into shadows that had believed themselves invisible. Lance Corporal Jack Morales learned this lesson the first time a sound to his left turned into silence forever after one pull of the trigger. In the jungle, you did not track a target. You erased a space. As campaigns dragged on through New Georgia, Bougainville, and the endless green hells of 1943, the shotgun stopped being a novelty and became a system. Point men carried it because hesitation meant death. An ambush that once would have claimed the first man now died in its crib, a sudden blast ripping through brush, bark, and bodies alike. At night, the shotgun owned the perimeter. Japanese infiltrators moved as doctrine demanded, low, quiet, patient. But patience died in overlapping cones of buckshot that turned stealth into exposure. Marines learned to sweep lanes through foliage, firing not to kill immediately, but to strip the jungle bare, revealing what hid beneath it. Then the war changed again. The enemy stopped meeting them in lines and started living inside the earth. Tarawa hinted at it. Palaliu perfected it. Colonel Masaru Ito's men vanished into coral ridges, their defenses immune to shell fire and bombs, forcing Americans into arm's-length violence. Here the shotgun found a new purpose. Cave mouths became thresholds of terror. One blast inside, then another. Buckshot screamed off stone walls, ricocheting until the cave itself became the weapon. Survivors spoke of a sound that had no direction, metal shrieking everywhere at once, fear detonating before flesh ever did. By Saipan, Marines organized around this reality. Shotgun teams moved like surgeons into infected ground, 2 pumps in front, a bar roaring behind them, grenades sealing exits. Buckshot for chaos, slugs for reach, bird shot to peel away concealment. Every load had a role. On the night of July 7, 1944, when thousands of Japanese soldiers surged forward in the largest banzai charge of the war, the battlefield dissolved into screams, smoke, and darkness. Machine guns did the killing at distance, but when the lines bent and broke, when bodies collided in the black, it was the shotgun that spoke clearest. No aiming, no searching, just impact. By the time the war reached Iwo Jima, the enemy had anticipated everything except how completely the fight had become subterranean. General Kuribayashi built a fortress beneath the island, miles of tunnels and chambers designed to exhaust the Americans and erase their advantages. But the Marines arrived already changed. They had learned that the war was no longer fought across beaches or hills, but inside caves, corridors, and moments measured in heartbeats. And as they descended into the volcanic depths, carrying weapons meant for hunters and civilians, one question hung in the sulfur air. Could anything stop a tool perfected for killing in darkness when darkness itself had become the battlefield? By the time the Marines reached the black volcanic slopes of Hoshima Island, the enemy had turned the earth itself into a weapon. Tunnel mouths bent away from direct fire, chambers staggered like teeth, exits hidden to deny entrapment. Captain Ryohei Nakamura believed he had finally built a defense immune to American solutions. Bombs shattered the surface but left the underground untouched. Flamethrowers scorched entrances only to find emptiness beyond the bend. The war had narrowed to corners, shadows, and breathless seconds. And still, the shotgun followed. Corporal Thomas Reed learned to fire without seeing. Skip shooting, they called it, banking buckshot off tunnel walls, letting physics do what sight could not. One blast into stone, the pellets screaming down side passages, ricocheting into bodies that thought they were safe behind angles and offsets. White phosphorus followed, choking smoke and fire rolling through chambers, forcing defenders to flee deeper or stumble out blinded and burning. One by one, the tunnels went quiet. Of the island's defenders, nearly all would die underground. Prisoners were ghosts dragged into daylight, wounded or unconscious, the will to resist burned out of them by weeks of claustrophobic terror. The lesson was brutal and unmistakable. No matter how complex the fortification, the fight always ended within arm's reach. When the invasion shifted north to the massive island of Ryukana in April 1945, both sides arrived stripped of illusions. General Akira Fujimoto no longer believed in heroic charges. His defense was patient, layered, designed to bleed the enemy slowly. The Americans answered with precision, learned the hard way. Flamethrowers burned, explosives shattered. Shotguns followed immediately behind, sealing the breach, clearing what fire could not reach. Soldiers called it the blowtorch and the corkscrew, and the shotgun was the hand that turned it. Despite the scale of the battle, the Model 12 remained rare, almost precious. Fewer than most imagined. Tens of thousands, not hundreds. Spread across Marines, soldiers, sailors, airmen guarding lonely runways and silent decks. These were not common weapons. They were assigned where the war collapsed into meters and seconds. Ammunition was plentiful. Shells stacked deep in supply dumps, buckshot for killing, slugs for reach, lighter loads for tearing away concealment. Reports after the battles were honest, not romantic. The shotgun did not win campaigns. It did not replace artillery or machine guns, but every report returned to the same truth. In ambush, it saved lives. At night, it stopped infiltration cold. In caves, it broke resistance faster than anything else carried by a single man. And in the final moments of assaults, when distance vanished and confusion ruled, it delivered violence no doctrine had prepared the enemy to face. It had limits, short range, heavy ammunition, endless cleaning under salt air and volcanic grit. But within those limits, it did exactly what modern war rarely allowed anymore. It ended fights immediately. As the Pacific War staggered toward its conclusion, the Winchester Model 12 faded quietly into inventories and memory, never meant to symbolize the conflict. Yet from beaches to jungles, from tunnels to night perimeters, it had carved a narrow, terrifying niche. The war had begun with nations testing machines against machines. It ended with men crawling into the earth to kill one another in darkness. And in that darkness, the old pump gun proved that sometimes the simplest mechanics survive even the most modern war. By 1945, the Japanese knew exactly what hunted them in the dark, and still they could not stop it. Captured notebooks and post-war interrogations tell a story not of ignorance, but of desperation. Lieutenant Masao Fujikawa authorized crude experiments. Layers of bamboo, lacquered wood plates tied beneath uniforms, anything that might blunt the storm of buckshot. It slowed men, trapped sweat, and failed where it mattered. Pellets still tore into faces, limbs, throats. A man did not need to be killed to be removed from the fight. He only needed to fall. Defensive lines were pushed deeper, false cave mouths built to swallow the first assault, obstacles laid to stretch engagement distances beyond 50 yards. But the same truth returned every time. Japan could not afford a war fought at distance. Ammunition shortages, limited automatic weapons, and industrial exhaustion forced their soldiers into close terrain where courage substituted for steel. And that terrain belonged to the shotgun. Unlike Germany in 1918, Japan never protested its use. There were no cables, no legal outrage. Perhaps because too much had already been done in China. Perhaps because diplomacy had long since burned away. Or perhaps because by the time the shotgun revealed its full effect, Japan was fighting for survival, not legal precedent. The irony lingered. Poison gas remained unused, banned by memory and fear, while the shotgun, brutal, simple, devastating, remained perfectly legal. At home, the Marines turned blood into doctrine. Training programs absorbed the lessons written in sweat and bone. At Camp Lejeune, instructors drilled men until movement replaced thought. Shells were heavy, awkward, precious. 50 rounds felt like a sack of bricks after 10 miles of jungle. Elastic loops and bandoliers became lifelines. Firing stances abandoned tradition. Hips forward, eyes up, balance over precision. Point shooting replaced sight pictures. The closest threat died first. The trigger stayed down. The forend never stopped moving. Maintenance became ritual. Salt air, volcanic grit, jungle rot, all enemies as lethal as bullets. A dirty action meant death. Clean guns saved lives. No other army fought quite this way. Britain trusted submachine guns. The Soviets drowned trenches in fire from drum-fed PPSHs. Germany relied on precision and burst fire. Japan clung to rifles and blades, spirit over steel. America chose pragmatism. Whatever worked stayed. Whatever killed fastest was kept. By 1945, the reduction of a Japanese strongpoint followed a grim choreography. Ships thundered offshore. Aircraft crushed the surface. Artillery sealed the ground. Machine guns pinned what survived. Flamethrowers burned the entrances. And then men went forward. When the distance collapsed to feet, when smoke and screams filled the space where orders could not survive, the shotgun stepped into its final role. Not a symbol, not a miracle weapon, a tool for the last 10 seconds of a fight. Its impact went beyond casualties. Japanese survivors spoke of the sound, the pump cycling in darkness, the echo inside caves, the knowledge that no charge, no prayer, no discipline could outrun it. American Marines felt it too. Confidence, control, the understanding that if the enemy reached you, you still held the advantage. The Winchester Model 12 did not win the Pacific War, but it shaped how it was survived. In a conflict defined by machines and mass, it proved that wars still end at touching distance. And when they did, the side that brought the most violence into the smallest space walked away alive. For the men who carried it, the shotgun was more than steel and wood. It was reassurance made mechanical. In the choking darkness of a perimeter at 2 a.m, Private Samuel Knox felt steadier knowing what rested in his hands. The Model 12 did not argue, hesitate, or surprise its owner. It worked. Under rain, mud, sweat, and fear, it worked. Marines spoke quietly about the sound. Not the blast, but the pump cycling afterward. That hard final clack meant survival. It meant the line was still intact. Some veterans believed the Japanese feared it. Others believed it simply told them resistance was pointless. Either way, the effect was real. Anxiety eased. Confidence replaced dread. After the surrender, analysts tried to turn memory into numbers. Reports were cautious, almost cold. The shotgun was not a battlefield solution, they wrote. Its range was short, its ammunition heavy, its usefulness narrow. Yet the same documents kept circling back to the same conclusion. In caves, at night, in sudden contact measured in feet, nothing carried by one man was more decisive. The Model 12 did not dominate open ground. It did not breach concrete bunkers alone. It complicated supply chains and demanded constant maintenance, and still, it remained. Korea proved why. Frozen hills, night probes, close assaults. Vietnam confirmed it again. Jungle patrols, tunnel mouths. The same problems, the same answer. New shotguns came, sleeker, safer, stripped of slam fire for peacetime hands, yet the lineage was unmistakable. The pump action endured because it asked nothing complicated of the man using it. Pull, push, survive. Historians piece the story together from fragments. Reports that mentioned it only in passing. Equipment lists that counted weapons but not lives. Manuals that explained function without fear. Veterans who remembered too much or too little. Japanese records burned, buried, or lost. Photographs frozen in time, unable to tell what happened a second later. From this broken record, no legend emerged, only a pattern. Wherever American industry could afford specialization, it embraced it. Where other nations standardized out of necessity, the United States tailored. 60,000 shotguns among millions of rifles was not excess. It was intent. The ability to equip men for the worst 10 seconds of a battle mattered as much as planning for the longest campaign. The Winchester Model 12 never became a symbol like the Garand or the Thompson. It had no parades, no speeches. It lived where wars are decided without witnesses, in tunnels, in jungle lanes, in the final rush of breath before impact. When the Pacific War ended, it disappeared quietly, already obsolete in a world turning toward missiles and jets. But for those who heard it cycle in the dark, it never left. Because when the war stripped everything else away, distance, doctrine, honor, certainty, the fight always ended the same way. Close, violent, human. And in that space, the old pump gun proved that sometimes the most modern advantage is simply ending the fight before the enemy can touch you.